Chegou um ponto em que os habitantes de Marte não podiam mais negar o aquecimento de seu planeta ou a escala da destruição que estava por vir. Em uma última tentativa desesperada de preservar sua civilização, eles construíram vastos canais conectando os polos do planeta à grande extensão de terra arrasada que cobriu o resto da superfície. O degelo anual das camadas de gelo polares produziria a água necessária para o cultivo de alimentos suficiente para a sobrevivência de pelo menos mais uma geração.
Educação indígena. A educação na aldeia indígena começa desde a primeira idade. Não segue os padrões de sala de aula. É um aprender sem pressa na solidariedade. Aprende que a agitação da formiga e o canto do sapo indicam que a chuva vem aí. Aprende a apreciar desde pequeno um bom peixe assado com vinho de açaí. Aprende que na arte de pescar só se pesca o que vai precisar. E a calma é importante para a flecha no peixe acertar. Aprende com os mais velhos, nossa memória viva, com os espíritos conversar e deles a permissão receber para na mata entrar.
Eu não tinha porra nenhuma pra fazer lá. Quer dizer, por que será que moro com a minha ex-namorada, sua nova namorada e a ex-namorada dela? Como é que alguém pode se sentir bem assim? Eu poderia estar escrevendo essa história de uma cela de cadeia. Engraçado, né? Ted e Alice, antes da minha partida, disseram: nada é tão ruim que não possa piorar ele. Eu não sabia mais o que fazer. Peguei um voo sim, eu fiz isso. Pra Portland. E a Julie e a Cris me buscaram no aeroporto. Eu estava muito doidona no avião.
Encontrei ela ali, hoje de manhã, de barriga para cima. Revelou Dona Elodia, indicando um ponto na praia onde se juntava o lixo que o mar trazia ou desenterrava. Troncos, sacolas plásticas, garrafas. Envenenada? Acho que sim. O que fizeram com ela? Enterraram? Dona Elodia fez que sim com a cabeça e disse: meus netos. Lá em cima, no cemitério? Não, aqui mesmo na praia. Muitos cães do povoado morriam envenenados. Havia quem dissesse que eram mortos de propósito, mas Damares não podia acreditar que existissem pessoas capazes de fazer algo assim, e achava que os cachorros comiam por engano as iscas com veneno deixadas para os ratos, ou comiam os ratos, que por estarem envenenados eram caçados com facilidade. Sinto muito, disse Damares.
O imenso moedor está triturando animais mortos recolhidos nas estradas. Tanto o barulho do motor quanto dos ossos sendo esmagados ricocheteiam nas paredes altas do galpão. A mistura de som e fedor enfurece os sentidos. Edgar Wilson deixa o carrinho no lugar delimitado por um retângulo pintado no chão e sobe os degraus de uma escadinha de alumínio que dá acesso à caçamba do moedor, de onde é possível ver o lado de dentro. Consegue ver o que é? Grita um funcionário afastando o protetor auditivo. Não estou vendo nada, grita de volta Edgar Wilson. Desde cedo tá assim, agarrando. Mas não estou vendo nada.
Sobre o autoritarismo brasileiro. Lilia Moritz Schwartz. Demorei aqui, Escravidão e racismo. No Brasil, o sistema escravocrata transformou-se num modelo tão enraizado que acabou se convertendo numa linguagem com graves consequências. Graçou por aqui, do século XVI ao XIX, uma escandalosa injustiça amparada pela artimanha da legalidade. Como não havia nada em nossa legislação que vetasse ou regulasse tal sistema, ele se espraiou por todo o país, entrando firme nos costumes da terra. Imperou no nosso território uma grande bastardia jurídica, a total falta de direitos de alguns ante a imensa concentração de poderes nas mãos de outros. Fim.
Se alguém for um espírito guardião, mandado pela primeira vez para habitar um hospedeiro que veio ao mundo em Umaniá, uma cidade na terra dos grandes pais, a primeira coisa a surpreender o espírito seria a imensidão da terra. Quando o espírito guardião desce, com o corpo reencarnado do novo hospedeiro em direção à terra, o que se revela ao olho é assombroso. Subitamente, como se alguma cortina primordial fosse aberta, estamos expostos a uma extensão de vegetação verde e luxuriante.
Quando retirei a faca da mala de roupas, embrulhada em um pedaço de tecido antigo e encardido, com nódoas escuras e um nó no meio, tinha pouco mais de 7 anos. Minha irmã, Belonísia, que estava comigo, era mais nova há 1 ano. Pouco antes daquele evento, estávamos no terreiro da casa antiga, brincando com bonecas feitas de espiga de milho, colhidas na semana anterior. Aproveitávamos as palhas que já amarelavam para vestir feito roupas nos sabugos. Falávamos que as bonecas eram as nossas filhas, filhas de Bibiana e Belonísia.
Um apartamento em Urano. Em termos biológicos, afirmar que são necessários um homem e uma mulher para levar a cabo um processo de reprodução sexual é tão ridículo quanto eram, em outros tempos, as afirmações de que a reprodução só aconteceria entre 2 corpos que partilhassem a mesma religião, o mesmo sangue, a mesma cor de pele ou o mesmo status social.
Da mesma maneira que, enquanto estamos presos, não cremos na vida livre que não podemos esquecer. Uma vez soltos, esquecemos a coerência interna da vida na prisão, de cuja realidade, no entanto, não duvidamos. Hoje sei que saí, venho saindo da prisão como quem sai de um sonho, ao passo que, enquanto preso, eu julgava que Santo Amaro, o solar da fossa e a TV Record é que tinham sido um sonho, do qual não era possível sair.
Às vezes você fazia um pensamento e morava nele, afastava-se. Construiu uma casa assim, longínqua, dentro de mim. Era esse o seu modo de lidar com as coisas. Hoje, prefiro pensar que você partiu para regressar a mim e não queria apenas a sua ausência como legado. Eu queria um tipo de presença, ainda que dolorida e triste. E apesar de tudo, nesta casa, nesse apartamento, você será sempre o corpo que não vai parar de morrer. Será sempre o pai que se recusa a partir.
Quando o menino tinha 4 anos, ele perguntou ao pai, por que as pessoas precisavam dormir? O pai respondeu, para que Deus conseguisse desfuder tudo que eles fuderam. Quando o menino tinha 12, ele perguntou à mãe, por que o pai tinha ido embora de casa? A mãe disse, para poder fuder com tudo que passar pela frente. Quando o menino tinha 13, ele quis saber por que o pai tinha voltado para casa. A mãe respondeu, eu tenho 41, eu não estou afim de ficar procurando alguém para fuder. Aos 14, quando os palavrões pareciam jorrar da boca dos amigos feito água num cano furado, a palavra foda não exercia nenhum fascínio sobre o garoto. Nenhum pingo.
Firme, não suporto o chão de seus fundamentos. Tô de saco cheio de chamar tua imprudência de lei. Cada noite conto meus irmãos. E pela manhã, quando alguns não sobrevivem para serem contados, conto as covas que deixaram. Estendo a mão ao povo preto e toco apenas o ar. Seu truque de mestre, América. Ora ele respira, ora não. Abra cadáver. Macumba para turista. Feitiço que alega não praticar. Dá logo uma pistola ao meu primo para fazer o trampo por vocês. Eu tentei, gente branca. Tentei branquelos, mas passaram o funeral do meu mano fazendo planos para um cafezinho. Falando alto demais, ao lado de seus ossos.
Ama. Está andando pelo passeio do canal que divide a cidade. Algumas barcaças navegando lentamente nas primeiras horas da manhã. À esquerda está a passarela de inspiração náutica com tábuas estilo convés e torres tipo mastros. À direita está a curva do rio que se volta para o leste depois da ponte Waterloo, em direção ao dono de Catedral St. Paul. Ela sente o sol começar a se erguer. No ar, ainda uma brisa antes de a cidade ficar entupida de calor e fumaça. Uma violonista toca alguma coisa devidamente inspiradora mais adiante no passeio. A peça de Ama, a última amazona do reino de Daoné, estreia no Teatro Nacional essa noite.
Chegou um ponto em que os habitantes de Marte não podiam mais negar o aquecimento do seu planeta ou a escala da destruição que estava por vir. Em uma última tentativa desesperada de preservar sua civilização, eles construíram vastos canais conectando os polos do planeta à grande extensão de terra arrasada que cobriu o resto da superfície. O degelo anual das camadas de gelo polares produziria a água necessária para o cultivo de alimentos suficiente para a sobrevivência de pelo menos mais uma geração.
Educação indígena. A educação na aldeia indígena começa desde a primeira idade. Não segue os padrões de sala de aula. É um aprender sem pressa na solidariedade. Aprende que a agitação da formiga e o canto do sapo indicam que a chuva vem aí. Aprende a apreciar desde pequeno um bom peixe assado com vinho de açaí. Aprende que na arte de pescar só se pesca o que vai precisar. E a calma é importante para a flecha no peixe acertar. Aprende com os mais velhos, nossa memória viva, com os espíritos conversar e deles a permissão receber para na mata entrar.
Eu não tinha porra nenhuma pra fazer lá. Quer dizer, por que será que moro com a minha ex-namorada, sua nova namorada e a ex-namorada dela? Como é que alguém pode se sentir bem assim? Eu poderia estar escrevendo essa história de uma cela de cadeia. Engraçado, né? Ted e Alice, antes da minha partida, disseram: nada é tão ruim que não possa piorar ele. Eu não sabia mais o que fazer. Peguei um voo sim, eu fiz isso. Para Portland. E a Julie e a Cris me buscaram no aeroporto. Eu estava muito doidona no avião.
Encontrei ela ali, hoje de manhã, de barriga para cima. Revelou Dona Elodia, indicando um ponto na praia onde se juntava o lixo que o mar trazia ou desenterrava. Troncos, sacolas plásticas, garrafas. Envenenada? Acho que sim. O que fizeram com ela? Enterraram? Dona Elodia fez que sim com a cabeça e disse: meus netos. Lá em cemitério? Não, aqui mesmo na praia. Muitos cães do povoado morriam envenenados. Havia quem dissesse que eram mortos de propósito, mas Damares não podia acreditar que existissem pessoas capazes de fazer algo assim, e achava que os cachorros comiam por engano as iscas com veneno deixadas para os ratos, ou comiam os ratos, que, por estarem envenenados, eram caçados com facilidade. Sinto muito, disse Damares.
O imenso moedor está triturando animais mortos recolhidos nas estradas. Tanto o barulho do motor quanto dos ossos sendo esmagados ricocheteiam nas paredes altas do galpão. A mistura de som e fedor enfurece os sentidos. Edgar Wilson deixa o carrinho no lugar delimitado por um retângulo pintado no chão e sobe os degraus de uma escadinha de alumínio que dá acesso à caçamba do moedor, de onde é possível ver o lado de dentro. Consegue ver o que é? Grita um funcionário afastando o protetor auditivo. Não estou vendo nada, grita de volta Edgar Wilson. Desde cedo tá assim, agarrando. Mas não estou vendo nada.
Sobre o autoritarismo brasileiro. Lilia Moritz Schwartz. Demorei aqui, Escravidão e racismo. No Brasil, o sistema escravocrata transformou-se num modelo tão enraizado que acabou se convertendo numa linguagem com graves consequências. Graçou por aqui, do século XVI ao XIX, uma escandalosa injustiça amparada pela artimanha da legalidade. Como não havia nada em nossa legislação que vetasse ou regulasse tal sistema, ele se espraiou por todo o país, entrando firme nos costumes da terra. Imperou no nosso território uma grande bastardia jurídica, a total falta de direitos de alguns ante a imensa concentração de poderes nas mãos de outros. Fim.
Se alguém for um espírito guardião, mandado pela primeira vez para habitar um hospedeiro que veio ao mundo em Umaniá, uma cidade na terra dos grandes pais, a primeira coisa a surpreender o espírito seria a imensidão da terra. Quando o espírito guardião desce, com o corpo reencarnado do novo hospedeiro em direção à terra, o que se revela ao olho é assombroso. Subitamente, como se alguma cortina primordial fosse aberta, estamos expostos a uma extensão de vegetação verde e luxuriante.
Quando retirei a faca da mala de roupas, embrulhada em um pedaço de tecido antigo e encardido, com nódoas escuras e um nó no meio, tinha pouco mais de 7 anos. Minha irmã, Belonísia, que estava comigo, era mais nova há 1 ano. Pouco antes daquele evento, estávamos no terreiro da casa antiga, brincando com bonecas feitas de espiga de milho, colhidas na semana anterior. Aproveitávamos as palhas que já amarelavam para vestir feito roupas nos sabugos. Falávamos que as bonecas eram as nossas filhas, filhas de Bibiana e Belonísia.
Um apartamento em Urano. Em termos biológicos, afirmar que são necessários um homem e uma mulher para levar a cabo um processo de reprodução sexual é tão ridículo quanto eram, em outros tempos, as afirmações de que a reprodução só aconteceria entre dois corpos que partilhassem a mesma religião, o mesmo sangue, a mesma cor de pele ou o mesmo status social.
Da mesma maneira que, enquanto estamos presos, não cremos na vida livre, que não podemos esquecer. Uma vez soltos, esquecemos a coerência interna da vida na prisão, de cuja realidade, no entanto, não duvidamos. Hoje sei que saí, venho saindo da prisão como quem sai de um sonho, ao passo que, enquanto preso, eu julgava que Santo Amaro, o solar da fossa e a TV Record é que tinham sido um sonho, do qual não era possível sair.
Às vezes você fazia um pensamento e morava nele, afastava-se. Construiu uma casa assim, longínqua, dentro de mim. Era esse o seu modo de lidar com as coisas. Hoje, prefiro pensar que você partiu para regressar a mim e não queria apenas a sua ausência como legado. Eu queria um tipo de presença, ainda que dolorida e triste. E apesar de tudo, nesta casa, nesse apartamento, você será sempre o corpo que não vai parar de morrer. Será sempre o pai que se recusa a partir.
Ministério do Turismo e Associação Casa
The
Azul.
Ministry of Health and Casa Azul present the 18th FLIP, the Paraty International Literary Festival. The project has benefited from a federal tax incentives law, Vale Mais, culture, and official sponsorship by the Itaú Bank, and support from the Paraty Municipal Government, Pinheiro Neto attorneys, and you all. It's organized by Casa Azul, the Special Secretariat for Culture, the Ministry of Tourism of the Brazilian federal government.
Esta mesa terá a duração.
This roundtable will last approximately 1 hour, and it was taped ahead of time. That is why there will not be questions and answers from the audience at the end of the broadcast. We wish you all a wonderful flip. Good afternoon. We know that we're in the middle of a pandemic. However, as we can see, there's a considerable distance between us. So let's take our masks off. Rodrigo, Elisa, you're all welcome to the 18th Flip here in Paraty. I'm Jessica Moreira. I'm a writer and a journalist, and I'm going to chair this conversation between you for us to talk a little bit about literature and the importance of orality and serenades. Our patron, Paulo Freire, the patron of education in Brazil, said that the reading of the world precedes the word itself, helping us to build imagination, scenes, both young people, the elderly, everyone. So it's a huge pleasure to be here with you this afternoon for us to chat about this topic, which is so important. Elisa lives here in Paraty itself, Elisa, and also she wrote 2 books. Without Fantasy is her last book, and Memories of Skin. And now she also organized an Fuzue, an anthology. Fuzue is the name of the serenade here in Paraty. And you're going to tell us a little bit about how you created this serenade called Fuzue. And Rodrigo, who's here with us, he has several different books that have been published. Rodrigo, with No Hard Feelings, I'll Catch You Outside. And in schools, he works in schools. He's one of the most important names in Serenade. They have a story to tell us as well about how they met each other. So I'd like to know, Elisa, when did words enter your lives? How did you begin to write the written word? I'm Elisa Pereira. I'm from the town of Belo Horizonte, the city, and I've been in Paraty. I moved in 2011. I wasn't able to leave the paradise. My contact with the written word was in when I was a teenager. I began to write. I write some my simple verses, and I always loved writing and reading as well. And I reclaimed poetry here in Paraty. We were connected to the world of literature. So life brought writing back to me and reading. I began to write again in the round table called soiree, the memory of the skin. This is my first contact since I was a teenager. What did you usually write about when you were a teenager? My writing was writing like letting off steam, talking about my feelings, existential issues, trying to understand myself, understanding the world around me. Did you say that you write from your skin in the depths? I joke saying that it's from inside. It's a gut feeling, the way I position myself in the world. And Rodrigo, tell us, you as a writer and have been a writer for some time, I have several of your books. You created the soiree in São Paulo, and you've inspired a lot of people in creating soirees. What was your first contact with the written word? I want to thank Elisa and my contact with you. My first contact that I remember was in my childhood when I was 6, 7 years old. I'm from a family that is not lettered. My parents only studied up to the 4th grade, and my father has a high school diploma, and I have 2 older siblings, and we don't have this culture of reading. And we played out on the streets mainly, but we didn't have a habit of reading in my family. Is when I learned to read and write, I began to enjoy reading myself. And I remember that sometimes when I went to the newsstands, I always asked my mother and father to bring comic books back from the newsstand, and they brought the. This is the future. He likes studies. He's going to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, something like that. But I became a teacher. I love teaching, but initially they said it was kind of a disappointment for my parents. And when I became a writer, they said, "Don't you want to do something to make money? You're going to be a writer." But my first began reading Maurício de Souza, the comic books by Maurício de Souza. I liked superhero, the Marvel comics when I was a little bit older, and I replaced my comic books. I went to used bookstores and newsstands to trade in my comic books. And in the school, although reading was always mandatory, I always loved reading. I remember a striking text in middle school was Bertolt Brecht's poetry. The playwright has a strong relationship with theater, but the first time that I read The Political Illiterate was that I was already familiar with Drummond de Andrade and Quintana and Cecilia Meirelles, but Bertolt Brecht's poetry, and almost 10 years later, I was working as a street educator called The Crossing, Travessia. It was a project, several different street educators. I met Gina, a poet, and through Gina, I had my first contact with soirees. And it was the soiree of Coperifa, and I became familiar with the soirees on the outskirts of the city. That was my encounter with the written word and my way of being in the world, because that's where I found my peers and a way of communicating with them through the word and orality even, and body. It's extremely important because I already had this artistic bent, but I felt that I didn't know how to express it. So it was a time that I spent drawing. I spent some time in theater and music. I always thought I was kind of mediocre in all these different genres. But when I found literature and writing, unlike what the school had taught me, soirees present literature and poetry as art. It's quite different in the schools. It's like you get a handbook about how to write properly. In slam and soirees, it's words as language and art. And that was my encounter with words. It was a milestone. It didn't close up, but it was a turning point for me. That's great. And both of you have a common story here. That was when you met each other, and when you met Rodrigo, some things emerged here in Paraty. Elisa, can you tell us a little bit about how it was that you met Rodrigo? This is a literary scene in Paraty. There are people who are always moved by literature. And SESC, the vocational training school, always has workshops. There were gangs. There was a workshop in the vocational training school, which is the pedagogy of the soiree workshop that Rodrigo led in late 2018. We don't know what was worse, 2018, 2019, or 2020. It was extremely difficult. I was discouraged, but I was interested in the pedagogy of the soirees, and I began to attend them, and I was fascinated. Rodrigo showed me films for us and told and showed us about the teenagers who participated in the soirees, and it was a huge impact from the work that he did in the history of the schools and the structure in the school, the despair, what to do to attract the kids. He was talking about his experiences teaching and how could he attract kids with literature and the poetry. It was a path for the to attract the kids. It was fantastic, I thought, and I became a fan of Rodrigo. And after the workshop, two more women who were participating there, we said, let's hold a soiree of our own. Let's start a soiree of our own. We said, fine. Of course, it won't be like pedagogy of the soirees, that there's a methodology of his and pedagogy of the soiree. We said, let's meet and talk about literature, talk about poetry to see if we can survive in 2018, because it was a disappointing and desperate year. And we began to have meet. We used to meet first in bars and restaurants in Paraty with no great expectations. We began talking about literature, having a beer and some snacks, and we took on a body of itself in 2018. In the latter half, or the second edition, we realized a writer from Brasilia. Actually, she was visiting Paraty. She was launching her book, which is Elisa Matos from Brasilia, and she wanted to present her work. And she presented her work. It was cool. And we had this insight to do this during the editions. We would invite writers, at first local writers, but from outside Paraty, and we had other editions with the circuit of the local authors, and we invited the Flávio de Araújo, poet, Luisa Lemos, and several other local writers, Natalia, who attended the soiree. Now you have an anthology, the Fuzue Literário is the name of your soiree. It's called Fuzue. What was the importance of this soiree to spotlight the authors? Paraty is known as a literary town, but oftentimes the writers themselves don't get that much attention. What was the importance of the soiree to spotlight? There are 19 authors in here, 19 authors from Paraty. So that was the idea. As I said, we met in this workshop, and I met a lot of people who wrote, and they wrote very well and had never been published. Here, there are people who have already published. There's Flávio Ovidio, who is our partner in Off Flip. Jill, several people have already published their work, but there are a lot of people who had never been published. So for me, the challenge, that was the challenge, to be able to have these people have a text and to see their text published in a book form. So it was extremely important for me to have the opportunity to do this collective work, because it was totally collective, this work. Fuzue Literário, the name of our soiree, it's myself, my boyfriend, and an actor, Claudia Ribeiro, and Marcelo Pinho, my boyfriend, and we do this work together. We have a small production crew, but in this anthology, we had the Off Flip label, and the cover was Guido made the cover. Gil, who did the work of artwork on the cover. So it's a collective project. All the editions have always been collective. It's all difficult. You have to, there are people who lent us the space to do the work. And Fuzue Literário, the name of our soiree, it was a time of great angst. It was very difficult in late 2018, a very difficult time for Brazil. And we wanted to do something to contrast what we were experiencing. And the idea was also to mix the languages. That's why the name was Fuzue. It's like an uproar or feast. It's like a feast and an uproar. Fuzue. And we wanted to do music, literature, and dance. And a few times we brought exhibits of photography. We wanted to mix the languages. That is why the name is Fuzue Literário. The name literally means an uproar. I think the most that we convened was 50 to 80 people. That's a lot of people for a soiree for the small town. It's like a crowd for on Paraty's level. Could you read something from the anthology? Actually, I'm not going to read my own. I'm going to read something from, let me see if I can find it here. I'm going to read by a poet, and these readings have not been provided in advance to the translation team, but we will ad-lib the translation. I love this poem, Cacau Miranda Trindade. She lives near Angels of the Vanguard, to write poems as if nothing else in the world, as if you had nothing else to do, as if time were running out, and it was, you had to depose against it to be happy, while the publishing house makes you laugh, cry, and go silent, absent from chance. Mix my verses with those of my comrades, those that I admire, to believe in verses with no rhyme, logic, or metric, but with the climate of the voice which sings everything, flowing through our throat, coming from the infinitude, to sing at home on the town square, to tell naked truths with fantasies of light, and to travel as a gypsy, infiltrating in where the culture of the spirit bubbles up, to flow from one place to another, the choir of angels announcing with trumpets, banjos, and colors the vanguard, the advent, the new, praising the pure energy of the people and creating harmony. Wow, that was fabulous. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And Rodrigo, look at the pedagogy of the soiree, what it has brought us. The Fuzue, that workshop, it was inspired by that workshop that you held in 2018. I'd like to know from you, Rodrigo, how did you create the pedagogy of the soiree, and how do you interpret the importance of soirees for Brazil as a whole? Because we know that soirees are spread and scattered all across the peripheries, and we know that your pedagogy, soiree, he's a teacher, he teaches history, he combined literature with pedagogy, and there's this approach to Fuzue when she was talking about, I saw myself when the work emerged in 2016 in the school where I was teaching. I didn't have great expectations at first. We wanted to share my enchantment and my admiration. And when we find something where your eyes shine, you want to see this shining in other people's eyes as well. And it was because of very toxic and violent environment, which Elisa said is where I was experiencing in the school, because at that time, the school where I worked was the second worst school in the eighth worst in 5,800 schools in Sao Paulo. So there were some structural issues, pedagogical issues, lack of principal. The faculty, there's a big teacher turnover, and poetry was kind of a light at the end of that dark tunnel, a way of attempting to survive with the best quality of life possible within the school, because I felt that I wasn't able to play my role as a teacher. I tried something in the off shift. That was the soiree. And I didn't have great expectations because I didn't know how to do it. I did what I felt. It was kind of a gut feeling and intuition. How literature brought this enchantment through the soiree, the way that poetry and orality and performance, and another way was an approach to the authors, with the writers, because we still live in a society which is not, where it's not common, unlike mechanics, housewives, even in a literary town. It's not like going to a bakery where you find a poet, you go to the butcher shop, you find a writer, you go to the street market and you find the editor. We're like a mythical group. There's the part of the poem, I like the living authors in addition to the dead authors, because it's like we're only in the library, on the shelves in the library, or on a picture frame. A good writer is dead writers. The only good dead writers are the dead ones. And soirees gave me the opportunity to bring this different form and to bring in flesh and blood some authors in school. And the kid said, are you really a writer? You wrote that? That's amazing, the kid said. Do you fart as well? It's like, do you snore? Because it's very different. It's really alien to them. And these things made that work, drew more attention. Other people began, they asked, how do you do that? People would ask me, and how to do that question. I couldn't explain it in 20 minutes or half an hour, because there were a lot of soirees in the classrooms. There were a lot of meetings in the off shift, a different way of talking about literature and writing, and this view of kids, and they don't like to read. That's like a prejudice, and there's this bias, and it's a challenge. We like, why don't you put writing on the
deles que os encantou mais do que outras?
So what type of poetry you think was more enchanted? Well, I would come to the room and I say, well, today we're going to do a sarau, a soiree. And do you know what that is? Well, it's like a literary gathering, a literary party. Well, okay, it's poetry. Oh, come on. Poetry, yeah, I don't like it. It's just too romantic. I don't like that. And I said, guys, listen, when I say it's a party, it's a great party. Is there going to be beer? No, we won't have music. It's not the idea. And I would say, listen, I'm going to write a poem. And then if you want to participate, it's up to you. And that was the first poem I did when I went to a soiree. It was the first poem I published in my collection, which is Peri Africania. Can I read it? Yes, please. This is how it goes. Please don't say you're afraid to say you're black. Say that you are native. Listen to the drums that have Northeastern blood. Don't be afraid to say you are black. Don't be afraid to say you're a native. And in the drums, you have Northeastern blood. Today, in the Quilombos and the Maroon communities, it's a periphery. We have Africanity. We are the children of a sacred land. Everywhere you have Africa. It's an ideology. Up to the Northeast, from Brazil, from everywhere. The sound is rap, funk. We have Zé Cabaleiro. We have all the corners exploding everywhere. There is the sea, there is a forest. Between the land and sea, we have the Orishas. We have lost our past in darkness and the end of enslavement. We have different areas, Angola, Brazil, Cuba, Jamaica. We have had so many battles, so many struggles. Peri Africa, resistance, Zumbi. Zumbi is awareness. It is the end of tyranny. He is enemy number one. Brazil, the country of capitalism, of Bolsonarism, and we will support as we can the shock, but we will not destroy our hip hop. I want to hear the drum, the voices, and we want to hear Trindade. I will come everyone together. We have Garrincha, we have Cartola. We will bring them all to light. And then we will have music. We will have an fusion all coming together. We have everyone coming together, destroying everything. We are from the favelas. I am from Kingston. I am from the South. I am from the East. All the mysteries of the Maroon communities everywhere. We are Peri-Africans. Please do not say you are afraid of saying that you're black or that you're white or that you're native. And in the drums, we have Northeastern blood. África, Brasil. So when I would close, this is what happens, people would say, yeah, wonderful. They would applaud. And I said, well, that's rap. That's rap. It's not poetry. And I said, yeah, it's poetry. And then I would show them the book and say, listen, it's here. It's not on a CD. It's divided in verses. It's a poem. But rap is, it's rhythm and poetry. That's the acronym, because poetry has a rhythm, has a pace. And I said, so that's cool. I like that, would say the students or the kids. And then this, of course, brought a new light with my students, with the school itself. And within this environment, there was a toxic and also a bit violent, institutional violence, school violence. So it was important to see something that would bring some kind of hope to all these students, because the whole idea of the soirees or poetry gathering would give them hope, affection, support, all the power and possibilities that the word, the voice, would give to us when we have a voice, when we have the opportunity to show who we are. So it's not only body and voice. The whole idea of the soiree, you have also this embodiment. It is orality and embodiment. It's important because literature will always have this image, at least since I was very young. You will always have that, the writer alone, and in the library, everybody would shush you all the time. It's like you're going to wake up the dead or something. So it's this whole idea that is, deaf. And this is what a soiree has to do, because it brings this orality, this embodiment, and this community with you, because the soiree is a coming together, all the readers, the poets, everyone together. And that's what I like about soirees. All the languages have their different space to be. It is a stage, you have music, you have the arts, and literature. If literature is art, where is a common space? It's in the soiree, it's a slam. And what about the peripheries, the outskirts? Where does this power come from? The power comes from the Coperifa, with this new way of doing soirees, of presenting poetry. And it happens in this expansion we have of the different soirees after a decade and a half. It starts in Sao Paulo, in the southeast, and then you have the whole slam movement. And it will bring this additional need that poets, writers that had, normally their texts just hidden in drawers, to bring them together, be it here in Paraty with the work of Fuzue, this uproar movement, or from other areas. It's this whole work of, giving voice, giving the necessary stage and opportunity to this kind of art. In a certain way, you don't need that, you don't need equipment. Of course, it's better if you have a soiree to have a microphone, to have maybe a boombox or what have you, a minimal structure. But what I've learned doing the soirees in school, maybe because I work in an environment that is very limited, very simple, lack of resources, because we had the school, as I said, with so many issues. So for the soiree to happen, you needed just, human resources, human material, people who would like poetry, literature, and who were interested in sharing poetry and literature. And when people will understand what is poetry, what is literature, they will remember, that teacher who would come from the Northeast who likes, chapbooks, bringing the family together, or maybe that bonfire of the St. John festivities in Brazil. Everything was a sarau, but it wasn't called a sarau, a soiree. But this was their how they lived. This was their embodiment, bringing their ancestry to the forefront, and the so-called griots, the storytellers. So it is to revisit something that was always ours, but at a given moment was left behind. And sometimes, if we think about the capitalist system of appropriating yourself and selling your product or others' products to others, to depersonalize things. So this is something that we have sometimes lost in between. It is our voice, our affection. It is the sense of community we all have. Yes, definitely. And this has also to do with what you have been writing, right, Elisa? You've been saying that your poetry was also something that was formative and therapeutic to you. So could you talk to us a little bit about this process that, in Memórias da Pele, your memories of the skin, and how you talked about this, the genocide of the Black population, affection, different memories of Black women. If you could maybe talk a little bit about this creative process. So, Memórias da Pele, my book, is created actually from this title. And I wrote a poem in 2015 after having seen an article about the genocide of the Black population. So it's like, we're always seeing something in the sense. But in 2015, I felt it on my skin because I read it and I felt it more deeply. And this is why it's called Memories of My Skin, Memórias da Pele in Portuguese. At that moment, I felt I was identified. Sometimes we're so dispersed, but at that specific moment, that reading was very visceral to me. And this is when I wrote this poem, and I will read it shortly. And this is a poem that actually gave the title to my book. And most of the poems I have here were things I had written before between 2007, 2008, when I was going through some difficult times, very personal issues. And I had them written in a blog somewhere. And I started revisiting this to start the curatorship of this book. So, Memórias da Pele is divided in three parts, as if it were, well, I'm talking about existential issues. And then in the second chapter, I talk about social inequalities, racism, and I will close by talking a little bit about love. So it is, like the path I went through in my life of self discovery, going through the recognition of who I am as a Black woman living in the outskirts of the cities, my parents from inland Minas. So it was a self discovery path and also self acceptance, accepting myself as I am and understanding that I do have a voice, that I can bring my own voice. I can bring my text. And based on what Rodrigo also said, adding to what he said, the movement of slam poetry, and this is something that happens normally, on the streets. You don't have, it's not structured, you don't have microphones. And they do it like that because it's also, that's how they want it. Depending on the slam, if you offer them a microphone, they don't want it. They don't want to work with a microphone. They want to do it, only with the power of their voice, especially for those who are young. It's important to give them this opportunity, the opportunity you have of addressing someone, of, externalizing things you believe in, what you think. This is why I fell in love with the work that Rodrigo did. I guess at that age, between 11, 12, 14 years of age, you have this opportunity. And to have someone that actually listens to what you have to say, we feel powerful. It's very empowering. If you wrote something and someone is there listening to what you have to say, truly paying attention, that is a powerful tool. And if you're young, you will never leave a project such as this untouched. You will be different. And you brought this even to Brasilia, right? Yes, I was in second in a award at the SESC in Brasilia, and it is Carlos Drummond de Andrade Award, and I came in second. And I went to Brasilia to award. It actually was before the book actually was published, so the book came afterwards. And it's interesting to see this process where you read an article based on your reading. Of course, journalism is another language. It become a poetry, and it's interesting how creative process will migrate and come together as a context where you have even a fuzue, this party gathering uproar. It has a different social context, and it also includes this kind of thing. You always say that your poetry, your writing, is based on reality, right? You always, talk about issues related to skin. So you say it is a poetry based on the skin, and it's interesting the way you place things. Yes, I have a strong conviction that I have to always bring into my work what I'm actually living and feeling, real things. And to me, writing, it has to go through you. It will come through you and it will reach sometimes others. Sometimes it will tell a third person story, but it will touch you and go through you some way or the other. Can I read it now? Yes, please do. So, memories of my skin. My skin doesn't have borders, doesn't have social class. It is a black skin. It is ripped in poetry, mixed in colors, and sometimes covered with horrors, and sometimes with love. A skin, like a skin, that will stop me, that will move me forward, that will make me suffer and feel pain. Death, death of the black skins. Silence, I'm silent, I'm muted. I will just go down, down, and down. A skin I have on my skin, like a tattoo, a live skin, a dead skin. I see my skin in the statistics, in the lists of the dead, as a result of the daily hunting around the favelas. My skin spread on the hot asphalt. It is a skin that will mix with the night, and in the night it will exhale pain. Thank you, Elisa, for your reading and for bringing your reflections as a poetry to us. This brings the two of you together. Now, you have been always talking about youngsters and children, and this really brings you together because it talks about how they are inserted in all this. And you, Rodrigo, you always talk about this whole idea of reflection, of thinking, and it's also therapeutical to you, I guess. It will help us understand the moment we are living. Yes, true. I started producing in 2006 after the moment of the soirees, the saraus in Portuguese. And to me, it's also a catharsis in this sense and also therapeutic. At that time, uh, I was in school and I had, you know, hardships. And I would go home and what I had with my journal, I would always write, I always had a journal, kept a journal with more personal entries. And I would do, this spurting like a literary diarrhea, but I would write everything on paper. And it was important to have this process. And then in 2007, 2008, I participated in a workshop with Marcelino Freire, and Marcelini was aware of my writings, and he suggested that I would, bring together the things I wrote in school and transform it into prose. And as Elisa said, I say I am a visceral writer because I always wrote from my stomach, and I would always think about things that hit me, that I felt. And I went through a process of looking back into these writings, these entries I had in my journal, and I transformed them into essays, into short story. There is an Augusto Boal, the playwright, says that every text is autobiographical. If not, it would be plagiarism. And it's true. It's true. I guess what Conceição Evaristo, with Escrevivência, I'm sorry, and other authors bring as self-fiction or witness kind of literature. But especially for all of us from the outskirts, of Black, from the favelas, and not only our people, but, the whole idea of being left behind in society, we always think about our pains. It's something that's like we we are coming out. We're bringing things to light. It is like undrowning. And at the time, I was going through a depression. I wasn't aware of that. So, in this sense, literature was therapeutical or therapeutic because, in a certain way, it actually still is, I guess. In the work I do with youngsters, with teenagers, I say that I'm not their therapist, and that's not the idea. That's not my focus. But I can also see how comforting it is to them, and it might even be linked to what Elisa is saying. I sometimes stop and think about a poet that doesn't want to use a microphone. They want to scream. They don't want to have that contained, controlled voice. They want to scream. They want to be visceral, something from the guts, that will come in and rip everything open, that will actually reach people in the gut, and that the reader who will, I can't remember this, but there was this sentence from Suassuna saying, like a text is like being hit by a knife. It's like being cut by a knife. And when I write, that's how I feel. It has to do with that. It is raw. It is visceral. It is, from the gut. And when you take this out, you open, once you get rid of that, you open a space for new things for you to grow to. And every artist does that, be it, with music, with the way they write, with their body. But this is the need that I have. Ferrez says that, well, a good writer is a problematic writer, troublesome writer. I like that because we are a bit, I guess, more sensitive in a certain way. And we have our sensitivities, we have our internal issues, we have our ancestral issues, all the world issues we have, our understanding of the world. And when we're living in moments such as this, when people say that, well, that you found, old dog bones or something shouldn't be raped because they're ugly, or if they say that they wouldn't have a relationship with a Black woman because that was well mannered or something like that. When we have this, when we're allowed to say this kind of thing in institutional spaces without anyone being punished for saying these things, this is very dangerous. This is a dangerous space. And so the artist has this important role because sometimes they will have this other approach, they will bring this short torch or the short light. As I said, it's something visceral, you know. I have this poem called Miolo Mole Frito. One day in school, my teacher asked me to prepare an essay, something that would talk about my dreams. And I wrote this essay here. It's called A Soft Brain, Fried Soft Brains. And this is how it goes. My dream is to kill my stepfather. And I'm going to do this evening. I'm going to boil some oil and I'm going to throw it in his ear while he's sleeping deep, you know, like snoring, sleeping like a little boy. I want him to suffer. I want him to suffer a lot, but it has to be, I don't want him to hurt me anymore or my sister. By the way, I told him, you do everything in my heart and body. You make me clean the house. You can, you know, sit me on your lap. I would cry, I would scream, but now I don't care anymore. But allow Beatriz to be, just let Beatriz be. And because if you touch one, you could spit in my face, you can suck my tit, you can hit my head against the wall, you can hold my neck as you've done so many times, but not Beatriz. She's innocent. She doesn't have the sad smile like I have, I carry with me. And I feel the emptiness. I can feel the emptiness. It's okay. Whenever I heat the oil, I will remember the temperature of your belt, how it will heat my back, all the threats you made of using and killing me and blinding me. Do you remember, Antonio? You said these things to me. Yes, you did. I remember it very well. I remember the scars in my face. That day, you told me I had to suffer and silence. Shh, you shushed me. Shh. You bitch, shut up. Shh, bitch, shut up. Shh, shh. Not a word. This is my dream, my teacher. This day, I'm going to make it happen. And when you put out your cigarette on Beatriz, made me feel sure that I had to do that. You would do it slowly, torturing her, bringing the amber close to her face. And I would just trying to think, what was the pot I'm going to boil the oil in? Do you know that meat smells, burnt meat smells? This is why I just keep remembering that shh of the oil going down your ear and burning your brains. Maybe he will hear the screams I couldn't give when he comes with his hairy chest. And maybe mom will wake up and see what he did to us, see what he did to me. I think you might be scared, teacher. Sorry. But whenever you grade this essay, everything is going to be done. And I will be away. I will be walking. I will be down the road. The soft-headed me. But it's going to be a fried head.
Pegar a gente na víscera mesmo, como você disse, né?
That was from the heart. These are situations that happen routinely and oftentimes because it's so commonplace, we take it for granted, like it's normal. Literature has this power of tweaking out things and rubbing reality in our face. I'm going to pick up on the book with no fantasy. It ties in with what Rodrigo was saying about bringing to the surface things that always happen and that we're not always discussing as we should. That's one of the places for poetry as well. This is your last release, Elisa. I would like for you to tell us a little bit about the process without fantasies and how you view this thing that Rodrigo just said, poetry, giving voice to these events that surround us. Without fantasy, the name is because not that without fantasy has a lot of poetry in it, but it is ripping off the mask and rubbing reality in people's faces. Some realities. I have a lot of text of experience from the urban outskirts. Most of the characters are females, They're not things that people don't know they happen. People know those things happen, but I portray them like to rub in people's faces for people not to turn away. They have to face the facts and they have to think about this differently. That's basically it. They're very raw writing. Okay, and could you read an excerpt for us to understand what you're talking about? I'm going to read a short excerpt here. It's quite short. My writings are quite short. If you want to read a longer one, feel free. It was just released recently, Elisa, in September in this format, digital format. And the anthology was, we wanted to release it to be able to hug people and everything, but we released it digitally. And we adapt to the reality. So far, we're adapting, right? So I'm going to read this piece, my graduation. The boy was walking up barefoot up the hill, full of great hopes. That would be the most important day of his life. For 12 years old, he premiered in the world, and he wanted the outskirts to be his family. Abandoned by his father and mother, he made his living with his grandmother's help to protecting and supporting the kid. Ever since he was a small kid, he was fortunate to have been recruited. He was trained in racing. He had to run around the hill every day, and if he slacked, he had to start the race again. It was tough. If he wanted to be part of the milk delivery, he had to prove his worth, to run, keep a secret, and go for hours without food or drink, and he had to know all the alleyways in the hills and learn how to use weapons, just the basic models. Target practice at night in the same place. He played soccer on Sundays. At the first time when he held a 22 pistol, he was 10. He was certain right there that one day he would be part of all of it, even more. He would be the king of the hill. Now he was taking a further step towards this dream. He would receive his first rifle. Training would begin soon. An assault weapon. He thanked God and he prayed the Lord's Prayer as his grandmother had taught him. There were the other people in the gang. There were 9 kids receiving their assault weapons. It was like a graduation during fidelity, their loyalty, and they got their assault weapons. He would finally be part of something important. He was moved. He wept. He felt huge gratitude to his bros who had already believed in him. The hill, that's why people only worked and ate and studied because of them, to keep everything organized. They had never seen any politician do anything for the slums. The police only came to kill people. They didn't even ask people's names. Sometimes the priests and ministers did a few things, but the real people that held the community together was the gang. It was somebody from the armed forces going to train them. He thought this was rather odd. He was curious when the armored cars delivering the heavy weapons, but he couldn't disclose that information. He was too young. There were things that he would only learn after he was 15. If he had everything along the line, the way that the brothers liked it. The end of his graduation with a face, a smile ear to ear, he walked down the hill, barefoot, shirtless, and his chest bared to life. Great, Elisa. Thank you for sharing this with us as well. Another writing, sharing a little bit of how without fantasy and memories of the skin, transform your creative processes while you created other spaces as well. So that's what I said. I tried to bring in, without fantasy, the reality, to have people reflect on reality. This writing, the graduation, is like a criticism. People, they always love to say that the only good gang member is a dead gang member. They never say which gangs they're talking about. I try to understand if they've never asked, How do assault weapons reach the hands? Was it reach the hands of 12-year-old kids? Was it Santa Claus that gave them the assault weapons? So it's like hypocrisy. I'm not blaming anyone. It's a lot of hypocrisy on our part not to question this. They should be in school, this 12-year-old kid. How did he get an AK rifle? It's like a long path to get assault weapons to reach the slums. How did they learn to shoot? Where did they do his target practice? Nobody wanted to. It's easy to say the only good gang member is a dead gang member, and that there's discrimination against people who are mainly on the outskirts in the slums. I would like to pick up on that point and say that Rodrigo, it's like poetry has already suffered some issues of discrimination, right, Rodrigo? What happened? And even in the Parachi, what happened? I think that it has to do with what Elisa is saying. The first thing was in school. When I published my first book in 2008, we had a movement. There was a lack of responsibility in school. So we tried to organize a movement to make some changes. And a new principal took over at the school. After he came, he had my book in his hand and he said, where did you publish this book? I'm sending it to inquiry at the Department of Education. There are a lot of stories about the school here, right? But they're fiction stories. I'm not using anybody's real names or the name of the school, but you as a teacher, you know that according to the bylaws, you can't talk in a depreciative way. These bylaws were drafted in 1968 under the military government. And the most serious thing, I think, is to allow these things. If you're worried about what I'm writing, you're not worried about what's happening here. The principle, if you want to try me, it's going to be like you're going to promote my book. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot. But because we work with this literature that we call marginal literature, the peripheral literature, and there's always people look askance at it and with prejudice, and they say you're teaching the kids to speak wrong. I say first, it's not a reading and writing manual. In art, you don't place limits on. Second, nobody takes the devil to pay in the backlands and say that you're teaching people to write wrong. The greatest work in Portuguese literature doesn't follow proper grammar. He's talking about Guimarães Rosa, the devil to pay in the backlands. And that so happens that we in our book, we are our own bookshops, and I attend Flip and have for 13 years, and I've always worn out my shoe leather. And there have been some episodes in which I'm one of the poets and authors who ask people if you like poetry and you like books, and I pass out my books. And there were two episodes. One of them in 2009 where an inspector seized some of my books, but rather Pedro Doches, a colleague of mine, we protested in 2012. It was another incident, more serious incident, because these literary festivals, I think they're extremely important, but they're not extremely important just for the publishing market or just for the guest authors. It's important for the territory, the local territory, that it be a territory that happens for the authors who are there in the territory, and for other authors, like in the soiree, I'm going to go to recite. There's a literary festival. I'll go to participate in the literary festival, but it's not always, there hasn't always been this view that I think in more recent years it's changed somewhat. There's more openness to the local poets, and the non-official schedule in recent years has become as important as the prime schedule. The houses renting out and the partners in the parallel events. But in 2012, there was an incident, and we developed several sales strategies. So with other people, we said, we're selling our books. I sell poetry. You have, depends, you have you can take an autograph, and it's a short story, And there was an inspector, a tax inspector, who approached us with a plainclothes policeman, and he said, "This business is, you can't sell this here." I said, "I'm on the street, I have a book, but I'm selling poetry. It's not cocaine." But it's not like packets of drugs. It's a dime, nickels and dimes. There's a double entendre there for, I'm not talking about crack cocaine, I'm talking about selling poetry. There's a play on words between poetry and paw, which is cocaine or crack cocaine. I sell poetry, and I consider myself a poet, but people ask me about my poems and verse. I'm going to publish a book of poetry, and this was I sell poetry. I sold it independently in 2014, and the NOS publishing house later published it. I think it's important to tell this story because, in a sense, for years I had been attending, in a sense, and I was pushed even for you can't sometimes, as sometimes happens in the local community, it's a problem of us knowing there's an international festival, but to knowing how to welcome the local community, whether from the Maroon communities, the Kaisara traditional communities, and the indigenous villages. The prejudice oftentimes against literature coming from the fringes, but as powerful as any other. And your literature across the oceans, your writing has visited other states of Brazil and other countries as well. But what about the visibility, Elisa, of the authors and poets and writers here in Paraty? Do you think that the Fuzue soiree has contributed? And how do you think, what are the challenges that you still encounter here? The idea of holding the literary Fuzue was to bring literature, writing for a longer period than just Flip, which is only 5 days. There's a big movement, this huge movement with Flip for 5 days, 4 or 5 days. We know that there is work by the teachers in schools, but in addition to which, except for the workshops that happened at the vocational training school, we didn't have the possibility of this place to discuss, this place to share with local writers. So this was the idea. Slam, I think they do great work, especially with the younger people, because it is somewhat a different kind of language. The soiree, people from soirees are 35 and older, but slam are school kids, people with a new language, a different language, because slam has this difference. It's poetry as well, but it's a different vibe. So I think that they've done great work with that. The challenges in Paraty are the challenges that you find anywhere. Slam, for example, occupies public spaces, which is something that I had fled from the beginning. So there's this confrontation of being there in the bus station, occupying that space, like elsewhere as well. The police come and say that you can't recite poetry in the bus station. I tried to avoid that ever since the beginning. So my idea was to do it in partnership with the spaces, private spaces, places where people could welcome us. So that's why we use bars and restaurants and people's backyards. This last presentation was in a great backyard of a private home. So that was our idea. That what's challenging is literature. To work with literature. You were saying that you launched just recently without fantasies, but it's like to have giving birth to another child, to raise, to give birth and raise, but to spread the word more. What are the challenges in terms of distribution to reach other places as well? This possibility of being visible, being able to do this marketing work. It's a huge challenge gigantic because we do everything. You play, you write, you carry the piano and everything. And it is really challenging and exhausting. We need visibility. When you're able to obtain a space to present your work, what happens is that sometimes the quality of the work, okay, the person didn't sell anything. They printed I don't know how many books, or they didn't sell anything. It's not because their work is bad oftentimes, because he wasn't able to achieve visibility to make his work circulate, his or her. Why the large publishers houses are successful is because they have this power to make their work circulated, what they publish. Although I believe that the small publishing houses have done phenomenal work. If you take the last awards, the major awards, Jabuti, that's the main literary award in Brazil. If you take a look at the publishing house, the finalists, shortlisted works, most of them are independent publishing houses. You can't close your eyes to that reality. This is amazing. It's a turning point because it used to be just the large publishing houses. So there's work that's being done, and it's painstaking work that's been done. I think that the social networks opened up a door in this path. For example, today I use the social networks a lot. Most of the people that I know, that I contact, that open up doors for me were through the social networks. So thus far, when you are able to find a stage, a channel where you can show your work, of course, you have a lot better chance, not just to sell. We're not just talking about selling your work, but to become known, to make your work reach people. I think for we who do this independent publishing, it's a challenge. Rodrigo talked about Flip opening up this space. It's extremely important for Flip to embrace this and open up spaces, in a sense, for this power of local literature. And I believe that's the challenge. We conquer little by little. What Elisa just said is very important, because one of the main problems and difficulties of ours as editors and writers and publishers is distribution. It's sales. Make these books reach readers. For us who do this parallel work, the soirees and slam, it's extremely important because we produce the parallel market for our own books to circulate as well. I think that I've sold, with all my productions, more than 12, 14,000 books, and 80% of them were handing them out person to person, face to face, in the spaces, taking your books in your backpack and sell them even after published under the publishing house NOS. And our book reached the schools because it was adopted by the municipal education department and bookshops. But this work, as a writer and an author, I had this work of publicizing and disseminating my work. Other authors have perceived this. You can't just write and say, "Come to me, you renowned readers." And on the other hand, there's the social networks. I think that the social networks have brought another possibility for telling and contact with readers, whether based on the possibility of writing message and the possibility of contacting you through a video, direct contact to this direct content, precisely. Even during the pandemic, we realized that there's this mandatory distancing, but meanwhile, we were able to, in a sense, reach other spaces which only with this gave us an opportunity for the market itself to be born. The main bookstore chain bookstores went broke. There's several small bookstores, independent ones, in partnership with small independent publishing houses. So I think that this is an important trend because we can't just talk about literary festivals or the biennial, the writers biennial without talking about producing a readership, because at the end of the day, they're the one who are going to, the reason for being, if we don't talk and distribute, if we don't make it reach people, what do you write for? Just write for yourself? For writing for your own navel? I think that's not much. We need to go beyond that.
Concordo muito com vocês dois também. E nós vamos chegando ao final da nossa conversa.
So we are reaching the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for your participation. I learned so much with both of you here in this short but wonderful conversation. And now, for us to appropriate even further of this territory we find ourselves in Paraty. Rodrigo, for you to maybe give us a reaction in a form of poetry of this approach you had, I would like to invite you to do this with me.
Vende pó aí, Rodrigo?
So, Rodrigo, do you sell poetry? I sell poetry, I sell poetry, I sell poetry. I have 15, 20, and that play a word between poetry and crack cocaine. In Portuguese, the word pó and poetry. But do you like the dead or the black dead? I sell it cheap. I promise you're going to like it, and I will even dedicate it to you. We have our poetry. Poetry is a feast. I want to love you. And this is what we like. This is how we get high. We get high with poetry. Come to poetry. Come to poetry. Let's sell it. Let's sell it. Wait a minute. What are you selling? What are you selling? Where's the cocaine? Where's grass? Hands up. Hands up. The mayor came has a prejudice also against us. Do you sell poetry? No, we just sell poetry. We're not selling grass. We're not selling cocaine. We're selling poetry. So could you imagine 2012 at Flip and you have a undercover cop coming to you? What are you selling? What are you selling? I'm not selling drugs. I'm selling poetry. They had a decree against us. It's an organic law. We are disturbing the public order. We are destroying historic monuments. That's all a lie. They just wanted to destroy our poetry, destroy. I sell poetry. I sell poetry, they would say. They want to leave us in the limbo. They don't want to give us anything. They want to have us sniffing poetry. I sniff poetry. I sniff poetry. That's silly. If my product is the best you'll find, no one will close my mouth. No one will shut my voice. I just sell poetry, poetry, poetry. I sell poetry. I sell poetry. That's it. The whole poetry is based on a play of words between the word poema in Portuguese, and pó can also be related to crack cocaine.
you.